Hey guys, if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for a link to my Amazon store where I've compiled some of the very best items available, including some of my own personal recommendations. Thanks! What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a little bit of a different video to share with you guys. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how to properly perform the reverse flick or the Spidey flick, as a lot of people refer to it. And that's because what you're seeing here is the Spyderco PM2. And as you can see, this opening hole is very similar to the opening hole on the Spyderco Shaman and the Spyderco Para 3. The reason that you almost exclusively see this perfectly circular hole on Spyderco knives is because it is an excellent means of deployment, whether you want to do a forward, regular thumb flick, or reverse flick, or you want to do the drop opening or whatever. But perhaps the funnest, or the most fun, however you want to say that, is the reverse flick. It's essentially tucking your middle finger into that hole back there and firing it this way. Spyderco kind of keeps that to themselves because it's a really convenient means of deployment, whether you're wearing gloves or not. But all that aside, the reverse flick and how to do it is, believe it or not, it's actually something that people ask me quite often, whether it's here on YouTube or, my friends or my family members that I'm showing knives, they see me open it that way and they're like, how are you doing that? And initially it's kind of awkward. Now, right off the bat, there's a lot of you watching right now that are like, I already know how to do this. And, yeah, fair enough. This isn't, there's not going to be really anything here for you. There's also going to be a lot of people going, why would I want to learn how to do that? Yeah, that's totally a valid point. This doesn't really gain you any benefit because truthfully, you could just always open your knife like a normal person. You don't necessarily have to do anything fancy. You can two-hand open it, right? Not saying that you're going to gain any sort of tactical benefit here, but it can be a little bit confusing, and it's something that you do see a lot in the knife world, whether it's on YouTube or on Instagram. You see people do it, and then you try to do it, and oftentimes this is what happens, right? You just... So I'm going to show you how I do it on a bunch of different types of knives with different detents, different opening mechanisms in different positions, and kind of explain my philosophy. But yeah, really, you're not going to gain any sort of advantage. It's not any sort of like tactical thing, right? It's just, for people wanting to learn. Spydercos are far and away the easiest knives to learn how to do this on. So right down in the description, I will link these three and some other Spydercos that I think are really good for, starting off. There's definitely some less expensive ones than the ones here. So anyways, we'll start off here actually with Spyderco. As you can see, there's a lot of room to actually engage this, whether you're coming in at, with your thumb or your middle finger. But how I do this basically is I rest the knife up against the palm, my finger. You want bracing because you're going to be pushing that way, right? But you need to be holding on to the knife so that you don't throw it while you're doing that. That definitely can happen. So practice, over a soft surface. Wear shoes so that the knife doesn't come down on your foot, right? And just be careful because again, this is a thing with a blade. So don't, just be cognizant of exactly what you're doing. Hold on to it with your thumb. Then you're going to tuck. Some people like to use the entire meat of their finger on Spydercos. On Spydercos, I actually like to put everything, including my fingernail, in there. Hold on to it with your finger and then fire. You're actually kicking outward like this. See if I can actually turn this around and show you guys. It's actually, you're kicking this way. And really more so, you're kicking up. If you kick too much out, it's not really going to want to come out. You're going to get caught. A lot of times you're actually trying to create pressure upward, is almost against the pivot so that you can build up energy, right? But as soon as the detent breaks, your finger is going to throw the blade with whatever force that you were able to build up during that time. So if you kind of push this way first and then almost slide it that way, it'll kick it out. Now, the other thing is that it might not work for you right off the bat because the finger that you use to do that will kind of have to build up a little bit of strength. And that sounds ridiculous, but the truth is yeah, until that finger builds up a little bit of strength and some muscle memory from the first time that you actually manage to properly deploy it, it might just feel a little bit clunky and awkward. And each knife has a different relationship between the position of the hole, the length and mass of the blade, the detent, right? And also, the system on the inside. Some knives have washers, some knives have bearings, right? Some knives have more or less access to that opening mechanism, and its placement might be more or less awkward depending on, you know, the overall design and the size of your hand and how you use it. So there's a lot of elements. There's way too many elements, right? And also, you know, it just, the reason the Kershaw blur is out here is because it's assisted. So that doesn't really count. You know, assisted knives, I guess I'm not really trying to put anybody down, but an assisted knife has a spring in it, so it doesn't really matter how you come at it. The idea here is to be able to do a reverse deployment on a non-assisted knife, right? Some knives like this XM24, the detent is so heavy, and the placement of the studs, and actually in this case, the studs' primary purpose are their external stops, right? So their placement is not optimal for deployment. And on this 24, you know, it's super heavy. So truthfully, no, some knives, you just can't do it, or at least my hands are not strong enough to do it. So don't feel like, you know, if you just can't get it, don't feel like you're doing something wrong. In some cases, it might not necessarily be your fault. You know, on a thumb stud knife, it really depends on, you know, of course, placement. But like on the case of this custom duckling, these thumb studs are really pointy. So I can do it, right? But I'm constantly like cognizant about how much of the meat I'm pushing into it. Let's go ahead and talk about thumb stud knives. They can be a little bit different. Depending on how much room there is to get up underneath that stud, you might be using your fingernail, or you might actually be using the meat of your thumb. In the case of the Ritter Hogue, I can use my fingernail, and I can also use the meat of my finger like this. But again, I'm sort of initially pushing up against the pivot, like, you know, pushing essentially the stud more towards the pivot so that it builds up a little bit of force, and then I'm releasing it that way. And, you know, once you do that for the first time, because if you're doing this over and over again, it's going to repeatedly do this, you know, and you're just going to be like, I don't understand. That you need to find a position where you can brace against the stud and kick it out and throw it that way. Some knives like the Microtech Combat Troubleshooting, or I'm sorry, the SOCOM Elite here, have ample room behind the stud. They also have a nice large stud and plenty of texturing. The detent is also tuned exactly right. So in the case of this knife, it's very, very easy. And the reason I've got so many different ones out here is not only to demonstrate, you know, it's possible with a lot of different designs, but it's just to let you know that some designs are just a little bit more friendly. This knife has a really good detent, and I think it's because, it's not just because of what I pointed out here, that there's excess room here and the stud is large and textured. I think it's because it's closer to the pivot. The detent strength is heavy, and the blade is about 4 inches, and it's 187 thousandths, so it's a big, heavy blade. By the time you finally do break that detent, right, coupled with the fact that it's on bearings, it's really going to kick out of there nice and easy. Benchmade knives don't have much of a, it's not really a detent, right? Benchmade knives on phosphor bronze. So they're nice and smooth, right? But if you just try to kick them that way, right? If you're just kicking more out, that's what's going to happen. You really have to get your fingernail, in my opinion, you really have to get your fingernail up underneath there, and you almost have to pretend like you're pushing up and then kick it out and to the left. It's an example of a knife that's a little bit tighter in the pivot, a little bit more friction. This Ontario Wrap Model 1, it's actually a combination of phosphor bronze and nylon. Now there is enough room to get up underneath there a little bit. I haven't really decided, you know, between using my fingernail and the meat. I think here recently I've really enjoyed using the meat of my finger, but even in this case, you can see it's really tight. So you really have to get underneath one. In this one, you really have to get underneath it, and that one's just not comfortable. Some of these knives, it's possible to do, but it just isn't comfortable. Truthfully, this reverse flick is not something that I really feel compelled to do when I'm getting the knife out of my pocket, unless it's a Spyderco. For whatever reason, this is the knife that I carry more than any other knife. When I pull this knife from my pocket, I automatically do the reverse flick on it. It's actually become a more convenient second nature movement to me on this knife and other Spydercos than any other knife. With a thumb stud deployer or any other, you know, mechanism, really, it's not my, you know, primary. It's not really my preferred method to open the knife. But I will sit around and do that. Some of you are going to be more or less able to do it on certain knives. I just noticed, you know, especially on the Rat, the handle is so long. Finding that bracing position, because oftentimes, you know, if you watched me with the Spyderco Para 3, the nice thing is the butt really rests in the palm of my hand. So in combination with the pressure I'm able to apply with my thumb, it's really held securely in place. With this knife, not only is the pivot tighter, the thumb stud is less accessible than the thumb hole in general, and the thing is so long, I don't really have a good grip on it to begin with. So the thing is wanting to kind of slip out of my hand while I'm trying to find the right pressure position. On top of that, that stud is digging into the meat of my finger because that's the only way that I can really, find enough traction to get it to, want to deploy. But even then, you can see here, I'm actually struggling to find a good position. So it might just be, something, it might just be something that's not optimal with the knife, Obviously with the rat, it's much easier to just do the forward flick. It's I'm not saying you have to learn how to do this, right? You have to be able to do it on every single knife. No, you definitely don't have to. Some knives just operate more efficiently in a different way. Again, like the Crooked River here, it's a little bit smaller. So, I mean, it's definitely much easier to just deploy it with the standard thumb stud. But if I want to do the thumb flick, it's easier because in my opinion, the thumb stud's a little bit better because it's a little more textured. There's definitely room to get in underneath it. And again, I'm using more the meat of my finger rather than my thumbnail, but it is possible to use your thumbnail. But the butt of it is being braced down in my palm, and then I'm able to create additional friction with my thumb. So it's actually really easy to do that. Some knives don't have thumb studs. They have more of discs, or in this case, it's kind of just like this textured chip thing that sits on top of it. And that actually can be a little bit easier to get underneath with your fingernail. So in the case of this Lion Steel TRE, that's actually kind of a small knife. And in some cases, small knives, it's actually harder to do that, because they're so small. For the same reason it's difficult to do it with an overly big knife, it's kind of hard to get it all, in a comfortable position where you're feeling secure, you've got your fingers in the right place, and then you're still finding it, right? Your fingers are actually able to bend up underneath the thing and then kick it out. Again, though, it's really all the exact same thing. You're just trying to get, enough traction right here to where your finger's not going to slip off of it, and you can start to push and build up enough pressure up more towards the pivot, and then slowly, when you can feel the detent start to break, your mind is going to sort of connect with that over and over and over again. You're going to know, your subconscious is going to remember the exact point where the detent breaks. And that's where you're trying to build up enough pressure and then ever so slightly angle outward so that you break the detent at exactly the right point. And the pressure that you're building up with your finger should launch the blade. A lot of knives have these little slots. All right, and that in some cases, these slots are actually the closest thing to a Spyderco. And, those are the knives where it's much more, I'm saying this and I'm not going to be able to do it. This is a new Kubi design, and it does have the slot. You can see there, I can just barely do it, but it's actually a little bit too small. So in this case, I'm really having to push my finger in. I'm actually having to focus on pushing my finger in so that my fingernail and a little bit of my finger actually stay in there. And then the detent, once I can finally break it, it will kick it out. But again, it's how much room do I have to engage that opening mechanism, right? Can I keep the knife securely in my hand? And then is the detent able to be broken at the angle that I'm trying to push it with my finger? And do I have enough strength in my finger to do it? Some other designs that are a little bit easier, that was a poor example with the opening hole, but unfortunately, that's one of the only ones that I've got around here right now that's not a Spyderco. Actually, here, I got one more. Let's pull her out here real quick because it's actually a much better example. There we go. The Tape Hornet in titanium has a much larger opening hole, and as you can see there, oh yeah, much easier. The larger this hole and the further it extends down the blade, the easier it is to get the handle positioned in exactly the right place. Get enough of your finger inside there to where you can build up some force and then kick it out. So those opening holes, if you're not a big fan of Spydercos, if you find a good knife, one that you're interested in, that's a price that you feel like you can manage, if it's got that larger opening hole, whether it's like a, shaped kind of like a half moon, or if it's more like a triangle, right? As long as the hole is big enough to, get your middle finger in there, you should be okay. Moving on here, these knives with these slots, I actually really like these. The ones that, fullers or slots that run way down the blade. These are really nice because it actually, depending on how big your hand is or where you like to hold this while you're trying to position this middle finger, you kind of have you have more of an option, right? Whereas a thumb stud, you're stuck with just where the thumb stud is located. But on this thing, right? I mean, you can two-handed open it, and that's great, but I can put my finger way down here. I can, you know, place it way up high if I want to. And the D10 on this guy is about medium strength. This is a Medford Praetorian Slim. It's so much easier to do. I really like these knives with these slots. Same thing here. This is a much more rare knife. This is a Custom Knife Factory Resenti Snafu 2.0. It's got this nice long fuller. And so if I want to put it up here, I can, but the further up the blade, the harder it is to engage exactly the right spot. But down here, I mean, I can kick it open pretty much anywhere, all the way along this line. And I'm putting my fingernail in here, and I'm essentially just kicking up and out, right? Up first, and then out diagonally. Those knives with those big, long fullers are wonderful for that. Again, depending on the washer system, how much friction, right? A lot of times, really, really inexpensive manual knives will be excessively tight. They won't be ultra smooth. So if you're trying to do this right now, most of these knives are fairly expensive. The Rad is about about a $40 version of the knife. And then the rest of these, I think the next one in line is maybe here. And then every single one above that is, around, I mean, at least 150 upwards of, you know, some of these out here are much more expensive. More expensive knives are a little bit easier to do that with if the mechanism is in the right place, the hole or the thumb stud or the fuller or whatever, because it's much smoother, right? The detent is tuned properly. Everything's in the right place. They've taken into consideration ergonomic lines and access to different things, whether you're right or left-handed. So sometimes there is a correlation there. However, it's not always the case, right? Thinking of Bestech, CJRB, and Civivi, to name a few that are manufacturing knives in the $30 to $50 price range. Those have excellent tolerances, and you can absolutely do stuff like that with it. The Spyderco Tenacious is a great one, a great example of another knife that is inexpensive and very easy. In fact, that's one of the very best knives to practice with. I'll link the Spyderco Tenacious down below, the lightweight version and the G10 version. I think you can get the lightweight version right now. I want to say those come in at about $45 to $50, and that's a really good one to start with for sure. Again, this is not something that you really need to know how to do, but I've had so many people ask me, and I remember my buddy Ricky and my buddy Zell and my brother all actually watching me do this, over the last few years. And once Ricky figured it out, I don't know if Ricky's watching this, but for those of you who don't know, Ricky was around in the early days on the channel when we used to work at the dealership together, and he would watch me do this, and he started buying his own knives. And he's actually better at it now than I am. He can reverse flick things that don't have any opening. he can literally just create friction on the blade and without any thumb stud or hole or anything, and it just blows my mind. So some people are going to be, they'll adapt to it a little bit faster than others. I feel like most people are just not going to care at all. But this was something that was fun, and I felt like was long overdue. It's kind of a meaningless tutorial, but I feel like some people might gain something from it. Don't give up. Keep trying. If you don't have a Spyderco to practice with, I'd really recommend, getting one. I mean, Spyderco knives, for anybody thinking, wow, those are so ugly and weird. Yeah, I agree with you. But the truth is that the design philosophy is all about, control and ergonomics. So whether it's in use, right, or in manipulation, that's why everything is placed the way that it is. And my Spydercos are generally some of my most fidgety knives because you can open them in so many different ways, right? But truthfully, yeah, they are really, really easy to actuate with the reverse flick. I mean, it is second nature. So once you figure it out, once you do it once, you'll be like, oh, I did it. And then you'll have a couple of misfires, and then you'll get it again, and it'll start to happen more frequently. And then there just is sort of a general understanding that's applied, right? It's something that gets logged permanently in your subconscious, and you can kind of apply the exact same thought to pretty much any knife that you pick up. But like I said, there will be knives where it's just really difficult or almost impossible, and don't think that means you're doing anything wrong. It might just be the design of the knife. Anyways, I think 20 minutes was enough for a reverse flick demonstration. Hope you guys found this at least mildly entertaining. This was fun for me to do. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like. So check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that metal complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.